There are churches in Maine that are going to court again because they're arguing that anti-discrimination laws that were passed by lawmakers are unfair to them and target their religion. And these laws make it impossible for them to take taxpayer money and indoctrinate kids. That is seriously the entire story right here. Let me back up a little bit and explain to you what the hell is going on. A few years ago, 2002, there was a Supreme Court case, Carson v. Macon. And basically what happened is the Supreme Court heard this case involving public schools in Maine. And I'll try to explain this as best I can, but basically, Maine as a state says we guarantee free public education for everyone in the state, K through 12 education. The problem with that is Maine, the way it is, it's so rural in some parts of the state that there are no public schools anywhere close to where you live. And what do you do if you're a kid in that area? How do you get a free public education? You really can't. The buses are not going to come out to you. So what Maine says is we will pay vouchers. We will give you tuition dollars if you want to attend a private school close to you. And we'll cover that so that you can get an education. And the rules here basically say we'll pay for any private school as well, even a church-run school, as long as the education you're getting is secular in nature. Like there are plenty of Catholic schools that may do some prayers and stuff like that, but by and large, they're not indoctrinating you. Jesuit schools, places like that. But they're not going to send you to like Creationism Academy. You know what I mean? So that's the rule that they had. After that, some Christian schools sued and they said, well, we want access to this money and we want the Supreme Court to rule that the state has to pay for tuition at our buildings as well. And so that's the case that was in front of the Supreme Court in 2022. And you'll never guess what the Supreme Court said. They said, yep, these Christian schools are allowed to get money. Basically, if Maine's going to offer taxpayer dollars to public and private schools, they're not allowed to say private schools, but not religious private schools. That would be discrimination. Judge Sonia Sotomayor even said in her dissent, I want to show you this. Again, she's on the losing end of this case, but look at this. What a difference 5 years makes. In 2017, I feared the court was leading us to a place where separation of church and state is a constitutional slogan, not a constitutional commitment. Today, the court leads us to a place where separation of church and state becomes a constitutional violation. Harsh words, but very accurate on her part. So, horrible decision. But you can understand why the religious right really love this, because taxpayer dollars could now be used for religious indoctrination. And so here's the interesting thing about this. Lawmakers in Maine, as soon as this case was getting to the Supreme Court, these lawmakers in Maine are like, we totally know how this is going to end up. We know what the Supreme Court's going to say about this. So let's pass a law to save ourselves, to save this law the way it should be. And so what they did is they passed a law with this bit in it. Check this out. They passed a law that included this section, unlawful educational discrimination. And you could see, look at the highlighted bit. They passed a law that said, it is unlawful educational discrimination in violation of this act if basically any school receiving tax dollars discriminates on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, etc., etc. They basically passed a law, knowing the Supreme Court was going to say you got to give money to religious schools. They passed a law saying, okay, but if you're going to accept taxpayer dollars, you can't discriminate against LGBTQ people, which is a hell of a way to respond to that Supreme Court decision. And guess what? It totally worked. Because now they were not saying private schools can get money, but not religious private schools. They were saying, you know what? We'll pay your tuition dollars as long as you go to a school that's not discriminating against anybody. And now they're not discriminating against on the basis of religion anymore. And so now the Christian schools had to decide what to do. They just won the Supreme Court case, but if Temple Academy in Waterville and the Bangor Public Schools in Bangor, if they wanted access to these tuition dollars, they had to decide what mattered more, the money or the bigotry. And both schools had already told the Supreme Court that religious indoctrination and faith based bigotry is just so core to who they are as Christians that they weren't going to change anything they did in order to receive the taxpayer dollars. And so the end result of all this is that as of August of 2022, when the Supreme Court case had come down and that law had gotten passed, there was literally only one Christian school, a Jesuit based Cheverus High School, that was opting into the voucher program. And that wasn't even one of the schools that filed the lawsuit to the Supreme Court. Everyone else said, no, we hate trans people more than we like tuition dollars. So in March of 2023, then, so we're cutting several months later, the church that ran the Bangor public school, Bangor Christian schools, called Crosspoint Church, they sued the state. And they said that this new anti-discrimination law was a poison pill that targeted them. And I want to show you a little bit of what they wrote here. This is from their lawsuit in 2023. Until recently, the state also exempted religious schools from certain non-discrimination provisions to accommodate their religious beliefs. Anticipating the Supreme Court's decision in Carson, however, the legislature narrowed the religious exemption, ... The exemption previously covered all religious schools, but the amendment narrowed it to protect only religious schools that do not participate in the tuitioning program. Without the exemption, religious schools are subject to investigations, complaints, and large fines for offering instruction consistent with their sincerely held religious beliefs. This poison pill effectively deters religious schools from participating and thereby perpetuates the religious discrimination at the heart of the sectarian exclusion. Which is a very long way of saying, you guys, we really want to hate trans people, but they won't let us. They won't give us taxpayer dollars and let us be bigots. It's so unfair. So that was their lawsuit. They filed that lawsuit against the state. They really wanted to get taxpayer dollars while being bigots, and they were so mad that the state was putting civil rights over their desire to promote faith-based hatred. And so they said, we're not allowed to teach from our religious perspective, as if anti-LGBTQ bigotry is like core to everything they do. They said the law was not generally applicable since it didn't apply to every school. Like there was a lot of legalese here, but basically they said if the Supreme Court said they could have the money, they deserve to have the money. In response to that lawsuit, like the Maine elected officials were just not having it. This is an article from the Bangor Daily News in March of 2023. Maine Attorney General Aaron Fry said that religious schools that do not want to abide by the Maine human rights should not seek public funding. If abiding by this state law is unacceptable to the plaintiffs, they are free to forego taxpayer funding. Love it. Just saying like, whatever, I don't care. It's their choice to be bigots. And so let me update you on what's happening with this lawsuit that was filed last year. This past February, a U.S. District Court judge basically shot down the lawsuit. He said the church isn't going to win on the merits. There's nothing to see here. You're not going to win. Go away. Like there's nothing anti-religious about non-discrimination laws that apply to everybody. And more importantly, the judge said, those laws regulate conduct, not beliefs. No one is asking those Christian schools to accept trans identities. No one's asking them to accept, like, to love gay couples or anything like that. But if you tell a family with a trans person in it that they can't enroll in your school, that's conduct. That's discrimination. You can't do that. If you tell a child whose parents are married and of the same sex that that child cannot attend your school, you are now violating the state's anti-discrimination laws. So they're not worried about your beliefs. No one's interfering with your sincerely held beliefs. It's when you act on those beliefs in a bigoted way, yeah, they can come after you. So the judge tossed out the lawsuit. And now the reason I bring all this up is because this week, the same Christian school, the church behind the school, they have filed another appeal. They just filed an appeal with the help of the conservative group First Liberty Institute. And what they say is that the non discrimination law violates their free exercise and free speech clauses in Maine's law in the First Amendment, as if, discriminating, not being able to discriminate, hinders our ability to be Christian. And I love this line in the lawsuit: excluding Bangor Christian schools from the tuitioning program is a feature of the amended statute, not a bug. Like, they passed this anti-discrimination law specifically to target us. And it's like, buddy, all they said is don't be an asshole. And you're like, what? Why would you target us? It's like, they didn't mention you. You're the one that connected those dots. Maybe you're the problem here. So anyway, you will never see a lawsuit like this where Christian groups say, we demanded the right to feed the hungry because that is what our faith calls for. It's never like that. It's always, we really hate certain groups, and how dare you not let us do that? So I will say that a similar appeal against the ruling, another religious group has also appealed it. That is from the Catholic Diocese of Portland. They say they want the ability to discriminate as well while getting taxpayer dollars. I don't know how this lawsuit's going to go. I will say that the First Circuit Court of Appeals, where this is filed, is one of the only appellate courts in the country that does not have a Trump judge on the bench. So that's good news. Maybe you have qualified people there. We'll see. But the bottom line is, no one was ever stopping these churches or their affiliated schools from spreading hate, from believing whatever it is they wanted. Like, if that is a core Christian belief to them, okay, let them shout their bigotry from the rooftops and let the rest of us shine a spotlight on it. But it was only their actions that anyone was concerned about. And these schools knew that they were going to act on their bigotry, and that's why they don't want to accept the money. Like, I think it's absurd to whine about how the state is requiring participants in a statewide program to adhere to the state's Human Rights Act when your goal is like to spread bigotry. If churches end up winning these cases, it'll only be because the conservative Supreme Court has decided that religious groups should be allowed to get away with anything they want, have their cake and eat it too, get taxpayer dollars, and be religious assholes. And it's not because these faith-based groups have any kind of ethical or moral or educational high ground. I will pause there for a bit. What questions we got with that story before we move on to anything else? I love the subversion of the anti-discrimination law. It's about the only way we can fight back nowadays. And it requires a legislature that's not afraid to do the right thing. So kudos to the Maine legislature for actually passing that law in the wake of that Supreme Court decision. If there are Christian schools that comply with anti-discrimination provisions, don't those examples, can they be used to say both this is not religious discrimination and not all Christians are bigots? Let me paraphrase your question, Vanessa. So there is one Christian school that is participating in the taxpayer-funded program, and they're not discriminating against anyone. That's why they're allowed to accept the taxpayer dollars. Isn't that a counter argument to this idea that the Maine lawmakers are out to get Christians? I think that's a valid argument. The fact that a Christian school is participating in the program shows there is no anti-Christian animosity here. Again, will the judges buy that argument? I don't know. I hope they do. And I think the counter argument they would make is, well, not all Christian schools are the same. Just because one Christian school is part of the program, well, we hold different beliefs than they do, and you're discriminating against us. So that's the counter argument. I don't know whether the judges will buy it. Mark says, I sure wish I could stand the cold because those Maine elected officials are very cool. They are. They can be. They can be. All the more reason to make sure you are aware of and voting for good people on your local and state ballots as well.